What is actually the inner child?
Well, the inner child is a part of our psyche, which means the way that we think, the way that we use our minds. And it's a very real part of who we are. It's an energy, it's connected to our subconscious, it's connected to who we really are underneath everything that we have learned to be. And sometimes we've learned to be something that is not completely us. So we're not really sitting in our true selves. So the inner child is like an energy, and it's all the experiences. It holds all the experiences and all the potential. So it holds joy and laughter and creativity and mischievousness, curiosity, all the good things, exploration, adventure, freedom of expression, and that kind of playfulness that a lot of us have learned to sort of let go of or deny within our lives. The other thing that the inner child holds is sometimes trauma, neglect, abandonment. It can feel as though it's not been recognized. And very often this happens in childhood when we have had a dysfunctional family background, or there has been an incident. It could have been at school, it could have been bullying, it could have just been that you were so sensitive that you absorbed everything that was told to you or even taught to you. And sometimes they can be direct words, sometimes it can be actions, but sometimes it can also be that you have learned a way of being from people around you, from your caretakers, your parents, teachers at school, society in general. And the inner child holds everything within that. But if we are not connected to it, and most of us are not actually connected to our inner child because we're taught to disconnect to that part of ourselves. So if we are not connected to that inner child, the potential that we have within us is basically not really available to us. And so we end up living only a portion of our lives. We end up living a life just to survive or just to get by or to be accepted rather than really being ourselves. The inner child also, because we abandon our own inner children, and there are a number of inner children, because we abandon our own inner children, that inner child may want to be recognized. And so if it has unhealed wounds and trauma and dysfunctional thinking and a structural belief system that actually is not true for the individual, then the inner child can actually prevent us from making good decisions for ourselves. It can actually get in the way. It can obstruct us from doing things that are nurturing, from actually supporting ourselves, because it's always looking for healing. And so in order to receive the healing, it can create problems. So we can end up thinking strange thoughts. We can end up not really accepting ourselves because others may not have accepted who we really are. And it can make us feel things at inappropriate moments. Do you want to add anything to that, Martina?
No, I just wanted to ask, when you mentioned that inner childs.
Yeah, inner children, like plural.
Children. Why you mentioned that? Because maybe somebody wouldn't be tuned into what it actually means to have inner children within.
Yeah. Well, most people think they have one inner child. And so when people do inner child work, very often they are only connected to or connecting to perhaps a spirit child, the best version of who they are. But if you only focus on the positive aspect of your inner child, that's fine and that's wonderful. But then what you are doing is you are neglecting the other parts which have different ages and have maybe different sub-personalities. Our inner child is also, or our inner children are parts of our sub-personalities. And Freud at one point said we had 9 sub-personalities. Actually, now in psychological understandings, we have actually about 200. But it depends which ones are the strongest and which ones come up. And each inner child may have experienced a different trauma, a different experience, a different neglect, a different abandonment, psychological abuse, etc., but at different stages in your life. So at each stage where you experienced a trauma, that trauma will stay at that age of development, at that age within that particular inner child. So we will have had so many experiences, and then each of those inner children will carry that experience. So, for example, when we do inner child work, we begin by just meeting our inner child, and we don't know which inner child is going to come up. It could be the happy inner child, it could be the spiritual inner child, it could be the wise inner child, or it could be a sad inner child, or it could be an angry inner child, or it could be a depressed inner child, or an unwell, a sick inner child, or a confused or vulnerable inner child, or a fearful inner child. And we have all of these feelings end up being trapped within us. And we learn other ways in order to ignore those feelings and in order to not bring those feelings up in our lives to the best of our ability so that we can function. And so what we do is very often we develop a persona, which is linked to the ego. And the persona is the person that we grow into because we feel that that part of us is more acceptable. So if we have been abandoned, if we have been neglected, if we've had a parent that's not been well, or has had a lot of financial problems, or had to work really hard and wasn't present for us, we can feel as though deep down there is something missing. We can feel as though we haven't had all of our needs met. And sometimes, you know, when Martina and I work with people, I'm sure individually with you as well, we come across people and they say, I'd really like to do some inner child work. And I have these problems in my life at the moment, but in my childhood, I was completely happy. I was free. I had everything I wanted. I was absolutely fine. I don't think that I can attribute any of my problems to my childhood. But actually, many of us can idealize our childhood. And when I say idealize, it means that our mind works in such a way to protect us. But by protecting us, it covers the pain, and it will only remember the good things that we experienced. But that doesn't mean to say that there was a part of you that was unfulfilled, unseen, and unacceptable. And we end up relying on our persona, we end up relying on our ego, which is the construct that we make in order to present ourselves to the world. But what happens is, deep down, we know that there is something that's not quite right. We don't feel that we are whole. We don't feel that we are complete. There is a part of us that actually doesn't trust the persona or the ego that we have constructed. And we may go through life being able to be quite happy and quite content, but deep down, there is a feeling, there's like an emptiness or a void that you're continually looking, you're trying to find a way to make yourself feel okay. And each time you do that, and that might be a number of different things that you use in order to make yourself feel good. For example, working really hard, achieving, getting lots of degrees, or attaining a really high position in a business, or creating your own business, whatever it is, or having a family, or having a partner that you admire, having somebody else or people in your life that you admire in order to reflect that you are acceptable. So it can actually affect our lives in so many different ways, on so many different levels, with relationships, relationship to ourselves, relationships to other people, to our partners, to our children, to our friends, our work, the way that we enjoy ourselves, what we do with our pastime. And very often people that have an inner child that hasn't been healed will end up sabotaging certain things that may be good for them. And the reason that they do that is because, if you can imagine, if you are projecting something to the world that you don't actually believe in, and you feel that you have to do that, you have to do that in order to be accepted, deep down, you know that that's not really you. And deep down, that becomes uncomfortable. And you keep trying to impress yourself, but you feel as though you are a fraud. And that's called imposter syndrome. So that's one of the ways that the inner child can sort of manifest itself, is by making you understand that even though you're doing everything that seems to be right and seems to be good, that still you're not content. There is something missing within yourself, deep within yourself. And imposter syndrome comes up in the most talented, gifted people. It comes up in every sense of the word, even within a relationship. So even within a relationship, you can feel as though you're not really being yourself. And if you have attracted a partner that doesn't see you, then that becomes even worse. And then there seems to be some kind of friction, and you feel as though you can never really express yourself. Most of the time, our inner child has been suppressed, and it has been taught to not express negative feelings. And our negative feelings are actually important. All feelings are important. Every single emotion that we have is valuable because it guides us. It's our guidance system. And if our emotional selves are balanced, then we make good decisions for ourselves. If our emotional selves are not completely in balance, then that will affect the perception that we have of ourselves and also the world. And so we may make decisions not based on our truth, but based on what we think is expected of us in order to be accepted. Does that make sense? Does everybody understand what I've just said?
You can write it in the comments, guys, if yeah, Jacob said thumb up.
Okay, the other thing that I want to say just briefly is that Freud and Jung worked with the inner child. And Freud in particular, Jung worked very much with the inner child, and he actually is the one that developed inner child work. But Freud also worked with the inner child, and he said that whenever there is a problem in somebody's adult life, nearly always it is to do with an inner child that is hurt, wounded, and needs some kind of attention. Attention, affection, acknowledgement. Acknowledgement is the most important thing. To be acknowledged and accepted for who you truly are, without having to pretend and act and behave in a way that's not really you. And this is what we see really all over the world, is that most people end up acting. They pretend. And this is why, again, they have imposter syndrome. So even if they have qualifications, even if they have experience, there's a part of them that doesn't trust that, because in a way they're pretending. And so even if they're absolutely brilliant, they will not actually believe in themselves. And I work with a lot of people who are incredibly brilliant and incredibly successful, and yet deep down, they don't actually believe in themselves. And why is that? And so when you think about a child, any child, what is the path to healing? And this is one of the reasons that we called our business, our company, the Healing Heart Path. Because how do you heal? You heal with compassion. You heal with connection. You heal with understanding. You heal with awareness, becoming aware of what you're doing, why you're doing that, and questioning yourself. That's the first thing that begins to happen. As you get information, as you begin to understand in a different way than has been taught basically for years and years and years, as you begin a different route, you begin to understand that some of the behavior is because of pain. Some of the behavior that we exhibit is because of fear. Some of the behavior that we exhibit is because we don't really value ourselves, or we don't really believe in ourselves, or we don't actually feel we are worth it. So we can end up giving up on ourselves in life and looking after everybody else, or we can end up continually trying to prove over and over and over and over again, relentlessly, that we are good enough. So we have to keep achieving, we have to keep achieving, we have to be perfect. Everything we do has to be absolutely perfect in case somebody sees through our persona, sees through our ego, sees through our veneer that we have created, and can actually see that we are not who we are pretending to be. And this is really important. And then Jung actually discovered that even though you can't touch the inner child, you can connect with it. And when you connect with the inner child, sometimes, and a lot of the time, the shift in people's mentality, the shift in the way that they think, the shift in the way that they speak to themselves is so deep and profound. It's life-changing, and it almost feels like a miracle. So everything that people always desired in their lives, when they heal their inner child, they can actually start to access those things, and they can begin to manifest them. They can begin to create them, because then they're actually taking the right decisions for themselves. And this is not selfish. This is another thing that a lot of people have said to me. They said, but if I start thinking about myself, I will be selfish. No, it's not selfish. It's self-aware. It means that you become aware of your own needs, of your desires, of what it is that you need in order to heal, of what it is that you need in order to excel in your life and reach your highest potential. Okay, I spoke for a long time, Martina. I think it's your turn.
It's beautiful. I love it. I just wanted, when you mentioned the self-value, I am meeting a lot of people, for example, with the horses, with the therapy. So there is a connection with the horse. And when the people, they don't see themselves, mostly firstly, I am asking people, okay, what is your value? So when you mentioned this, I was asking for a word, because Let's give us some practical tip, like how you can start to see your value, because when you don't see your value, suppress yourself, how can you even ask others to be recognized if you don't actually know yourself? Yeah,
Absolutely.
exactly, as you said, like about the awareness. So how about to put some practice? There is plenty, but is it any which you would love to give?
Well, if you're saying about practice, I mean, we could do a short inner child meditation in order for people to get a sense of that. Or we could even think about really simple things to say to ourselves, just to begin to open the connection with the inner child. And those things could be very, very simple mantras, just saying to yourself, I'm welcoming you, my inner child. I want to help you. I want to understand you. I promise that I'm going to give you a safe place to express all of your feelings, no matter how uncomfortable they are, and no matter how uncomfortable I feel. I am the adult, and I am going to learn to parent you. So I will be reparenting you. I am going to give you all the things that you missed out on when you were a child. And this is how we grow emotionally. This is how we mature emotionally. And this is how we give to ourselves. And it's about self-nurturing. So if you want to start connecting with your inner child, think about the things that you used to love to do as a child. Think about an activity that gave you so much happiness and so much pleasure and a sense of freedom and a sense of just being you. When did you feel like you were you? The last time in your life. When was that point? Were you 5? Were you 6? Were you 7? Were you 9? Or were you even younger? Were you 3? And a lot of people, another thing that happens is a lot of people, if they've come from a background where they have not been allowed to be themselves and they've had to adapt to their environment, then what happens is, as a child, they stopped thinking about themselves completely. And they started to think about their environment and the people that were in their environment. So they're actually not used to having that connection. And they have forgotten themselves. And this is where the abandonment begins. And then as adults, we continue that self-abandonment. So, and a lot of people will not have memories of their childhood. And this is also something really interesting to acknowledge, because if you don't have memories of your childhood, then there's probably a reason why. And that reason is that your mind couldn't cope with certain things that made you unhappy. And so it literally put a lid on those things in your mind. And when you become very aware of your external environment instead of your internal environment, and you're not connected to yourself any longer, then, excuse me, then you can imagine that if you are not connected, then how do you even know what you really feel? How do you even know whether the decision you're making is the right one? Because you are not connected to your whole emotional system, which would guide you. And if that emotional system is out of balance, like I said before, then every decision you make, you're probably going to make the same thing over and over again. And each time you keep trying. And each time it feels like you're failing. It doesn't mean that you are necessarily failing, but it can feel as though you are failing. And so then you actually abandon yourself even more. And then you become unhappier. And people develop depression because they're not being themselves, because there's no room to be themselves. And either they have attracted a partnership, and like you were saying, Martina, you know, with the horses, they reflect back a lot of how we feel about ourselves. So they directly mirror everything that we are feeling, because they work with energy. They don't work with words. They don't work with lip service. They work with energy.
Yeah.
And in fact, we work with energy as well. We use words, if we're not in our authentic self, we use words to cover that energy. But when people are tuned in and animals are tuned in, very often there's an energy or an energetic dialogue happening at the same time that we're talking, and people are actually getting information from the energy. And so we can end up attracting people that actually lock into the energy that we have, which may be a negative energy underneath, because we have a negative voice talking to us constantly, telling us we're not good enough, telling us we need more, telling us that we need material things in order to have value, telling us that we need amazing friends for us to feel valuable. And so we need to learn how to quieten this inner critic, this voice that actually keeps us from being our true selves. But also, when we have that energy and we try and hide it, we can attract people that then reflect back to us the very things that we need to work on. And so we can end up being in unhealthy relationships as well. We can end up doing work that we're not happy in, because we think that's all we deserve. That's all we can achieve. This is our life. And it may not be. You have choice, whichever point in life you're at, whether you're 13, 20, 40, 70, 80, at any point in your life, it's up to you. You can decide to change. You can decide to manifest the life that you truly desire and that you want. And it may take time. But to be honest, that journey, that time is so valuable, and you want to build something really strong and make sure you really understand and make sure you really connect, and it's worth it. Some people will fly through, other people will take a little bit of time to sort of to develop and to really understand themselves because of the layers of trauma. But like you're saying, value, self-value. How do we find self-value when we are in a situation where we actually don't have any true self-belief? Well, we start to appreciate the small things. We start to appreciate perhaps our sense of humor, perhaps the fact that we can cook an amazing meal, perhaps the fact that we are a parent, we have a child or children, and we care for those children. Perhaps we bring in money to feed our family. Perhaps we are just a great partner and a very giving and loving partner. Or we may do plenty of things for other people in order to receive that value. So it's acknowledging yourself. How do you find self-value? By beginning to acknowledge everything that's good within yourself and around you and in your environment, no matter how small it is. It's a form of positive psychology. So even every day, if you take a piece of paper and you write things down that you absolutely enjoy, like a really freshly brewed cup of coffee even, or the smell of coffee, or the sunshine, or the changing colors of the leaves, you know, in autumn. All of these beautiful things, animals. The connection with animals actually is really important and can be very valuable, because animals show unconditional love. And they will love you, whether you're in a good mood, whether you're in a bad mood, whether you look great, whether you look disgusting, whether you are sick, you know, animals are always there to love you. And that is a way of understanding what unconditional love really is. And before we look for unconditional love from other people, we will only ever really understand it and be able to receive it once we unconditionally accept and love ourselves. First, we have to accept, then we grow, then we like, and then finally, we learn to actually love and celebrate who we are, even with all our imperfections, because we're human beings. You know, we are perfectly imperfect.